My mother called him the angel who saved us from the street, but it was inside that house that I knew hell. My name is Norma Catherine Silva. I'm 78 years old today, and I'm from Bristol, Tennessee, deep in the south of the United States. I grew up in a wooden house that creaked even in the slightest wind, and look, it wasn't the cold that made me shiver in there. My mother, Helen, was one of those women who lived more in fear than in hope. Her life was all about praying, crying, and apologizing even to the wind. When my biological father left, or rather disappeared like smoke, I was 6 years old, and that's when he appeared. Robert Lee, tall, quiet, with a way of knowing everything. And my mother, tired and unable to fill her plate, grabbed it like a dinghy in the middle of a shipwreck. She said, "Norma, thank God that he found us. Without him, we'd be in the middle of the street." I just nodded, afraid of contradicting her. But look, only those who have lived through it know that there are men who don't give in. They tie knots. Robert had been living with us for a couple of months when those nocturnal visits started. First, it was just a noise in the hallway. Then the door opened slowly. And then, his weight on the mattress. And I, aged 8, didn't know whether to pretend to sleep or scream. But my mother said that screaming was a sin, that waking other people up for no reason was spoiled child stuff. The first time I tried to speak, she looked at me with wide eyes, dropped the broom in the middle of the floor, and said, "Norma, for God's sake, don't say such things. He's all we've got. Do you want to see us living on the street? Do you want to eat garbage?" And I kept quiet. I kept quiet for the plate of food, for the shabby blanket, for the fear of her hating me. And then it became routine. He'd say, "Shh, go to sleep. I just want to protect you." And it made my stomach churn. I didn't really understand what it was, but my body already knew it was wrong. Sometimes he'd bring candy. Sometimes he just brought his silence. Heavy, smelly, sweaty. And my mother, she pretended everything was fine. One day, I found her crying in the kitchen, hiding with her hand on her forehead. But when she saw me, she wiped it off and said, "Go and play, Norma. It's a nice day." And I went to play, forgetting. When I was 9, I began to think it was my fault, that maybe I'd done something wrong, that I deserved it. Because nobody said otherwise. Nobody protected me. And what about him? He was still the savior of the house. He took my mother to church on Sundays, gave money to the pastor, helped the neighbors fix their roofs. Everyone said she was lucky to have found such a good man. And me, I just stared at the floor, trying not to throw up. One day, he took me with him in his truck. He said he was going to teach me to be strong. He gave me a sandwich, turned on the radio, told me stories about when he was little. I almost believed that maybe, just maybe, he was going to change. But then he stopped the truck in the middle of the dirt road, turned off the radio, and looked at me with that smile. "You're almost a girl now, aren't you, Norma?" I just shook my head with a lump in my throat. And the rest, well, I just remember the silence and the dust coming in through the window. When I got home, my mother asked if everything had been all right. I said yes. She smiled, and life went on. But that night, there was no dinner. I couldn't swallow anything. Now listen to me, because this is only the beginning. There's still a lot that got stuck in here, a lot of dirt that we swept under the carpet until the floor started to rot. And one day, the floor gave way. Leave your like, dear. If this old lady is getting up the courage to speak, you can take a second to show that you're listening. Waking up was always a roulette. There were days when the smell of coffee invaded everything. My mother hummed softly, and I thought that maybe we had become a normal family. On those days, I even allowed myself to laugh at something silly on the radio or draw a bug in my school notebook. But most of the time, it was the creak of his door that made me open my eyes, the sound of footsteps in the hallway, his heavy breathing too close. On those mornings, I just got up to pretend I was alive. I brushed my teeth with an iron taste in my mouth and swallowed my bread with a dry throat. And my mother, she would walk around the house as if nothing had happened, pouring coffee with a trembling hand, but with a smile on her face. She said that God was watching over us. I wanted to reply that if God was watching, he must have had his back turned. At school, I was quiet. I always sat at the back, avoided raising my hand, and hated being looked at. When a teacher tried to talk to me, saying that I looked too tired for a child, my mother showed up the next day with a corn cake and a big smile, saying that it was just a phase, that I was introspective. And the woman believed her, because people like my mother who know how to lie sweetly are always convincing. And I went home thinking that maybe the problem was just me. Robert never hit me. He was the type who knew how to hide it. The marks he left couldn't be shown to anyone. It was in his gaze, in the low words in my ear, in the disguised touches when my mother's back was turned. Sometimes he made it look like a joke. He'd give me a light slap on the ass and say, "That girl's going to be trouble." And she'd laugh. And I'd swallow. I swallowed everything that hurt, like one swallows bitter medicine, without complaining, because someone said it was for my own good. One day, when I was about 11, I tried to hide in the closet. I stayed there, cowering, holding my breath. He looked for me around the house, calling my sweet name, like someone looking for a lost daughter. When he found me, he got serious. He said I couldn't play with his feelings. He took me by the arm and dragged me back to my room. He locked the door. That wasn't punishment. It was a warning. And I learned. My mother never asked. If she noticed something, she pretended it was something else. Once she saw me crying in the bathroom. I was trying to clean a cut on my arm that I had made myself, just to see if the pain would go away. She stormed in, saw me standing there with his razor, and froze. But instead of asking why, she just said she was going to throw it away, that it was dangerous. She never mentioned it again. And I learned once again that my silence was what kept the roof over our heads. At 12, I began to realize that I was angry. Anger at him, of course, but also at her. Because every day she told me to make the bed, wash the dishes, smile at visitors, and never, ever, look me in the eye for more than 3 seconds. When someone complimented her husband, she would burst with pride, saying that God had been too good. And I stood there with my stomach in knots, wanting to shout that God had nothing to do with it. The neighbors thought my mother was exemplary. Always clean, her hair tidy, food hot on the stove. I was always obedient, well-dressed, and got good grades. Once I heard one of them say, "That girl is a blessing. She seems to have been raised with love." I wanted to laugh, but I didn't, because if I laughed, someone might ask why, and I didn't know how else to explain it without spitting it all out at once. Robert started leaving little notes, folded paper in my backpack, in my coat pocket, under my pillow. Things like, "You belong to me. Nobody loves you like I do." I threw them away at the time, but I felt as if each word stuck to my skin. One day I wrote a note back, just 3 words, "Leave me alone." But I never delivered it. I burned it in the bathroom sink, watching the flame consume the paper and wishing it would do the same to me. Time passed slowly. I counted the days by the dates he traveled, because that was the only time I slept properly. On those nights, my mother was lighter too. She would tell me stories about when she was young, laugh by herself, and even sing. And I wondered, does she also wait for him to go away to breathe? But I never had the courage to ask, and she never had the courage to tell me. When I menstruated for the first time, I hid it. I used a cloth, threw it away in hiding, cleaned everything with soap until my hand hurt. I didn't want him to know. I didn't want him to think I was a real woman now, because I had become a woman in his mind a long time ago, and that disgusted me. But of course, he found out, because men like that sniff things out. That week, he brought me a present, a new blouse, blue with white stripes. "For my little girl," he said with that dirty smile. I wanted to rip it off in front of him, but I put it on. I put it on so as not to arouse suspicion, to keep the theater going. Because in that house, no one could get out of the role. And my mother? She said I was growing up so beautiful that I had to be careful of the men in the street. I almost replied, "The ones inside are the danger." But I just shook my head and went to my room. I locked the door, and I cried with rage, angry at the world, at her, at him, at me. And it was on that day, with my blue blouse still wet with tears, that I promised myself, One day, this paper I've been given will burn, and I'm the one who's going to light the match. I began to notice the time. There was the clock in the kitchen, which made that annoying ticking sound, and the one in the hallway, which was always 5 minutes ahead. I memorized them both. I knew the time for everything in the house. When my mother went to take a shower, how long she spent in the yard doing laundry, the exact time he got home from work, and how many steps it took him to get up the stairs. I knew everything, because that's what kept me alive. Anticipate. Hiding before, pretending before, smiling before. Those who survive like that learn to calculate even the other person's breathing. When I was 13, I developed a habit, listening behind the door. It wasn't curiosity, it was survival. I knew when the conversation between the two of them was turning sour, when he was in a bad mood, when the drink had taken its toll. My mother never drank, but he liked that glass of cheap whiskey after dinner, and that was when I learned to be invisible. The sound of the ice hitting the glass became a warning. I'd crawl under the bed or into the closet, depending on the day. Darkness was my friend. The musty smell of the closet was more bearable than his skin. One Sunday, I almost ran away. I woke up with my heart racing, grabbed a backpack, stuffed some clothes, an apple, and some change I'd hidden inside a sock. I was going to leave through the back door very early before the city woke up. But when I got close to the doorknob, I heard my mother's voice calling my name, low and hoarse. I don't know how she knew. All I know is that she said, "Norma, are you really going to leave me alone?" I froze, because I knew it wasn't blackmail, it was desperation. I went back. I put everything away again and spent the day pretending I hadn't planned to disappear. But inside, something died, because I understood that she knew, and I chose not to see. At school, I started to become withdrawn. I no longer smiled even out of obligation. When people asked me what I wanted to be, I'd answer anything. Teacher, veterinarian, astronaut, all lies. The truth was that I just wanted to be free, but saying that sounded pathetic. Freedom at that age was a beautiful word that nobody knew what it tasted like. I did, and it hurt not to have it. Robert noticed my silence and used it against me. He called me ungrateful, said that no one would want me, that he was the only one who treated me well. He once said that if it weren't for him, I'd be in a foster home, being beaten up by strangers. "You should thank me every day for raising you as a daughter." The word daughter in his mouth made me nauseous, but I just kept my head down, because arguing wasn't an option, and shouting was no use. It felt like that house had been built to swallow screams. At 14, with my period regulated and my body changing, I began to notice the looks on other people's faces, on the street, in the market, even at school. There were boys who looked at me with interest, girls who whispered, but I didn't feel any pride or vanity. I felt fear, because being noticed was dangerous. If my body drew too much attention, it might become more aggressive. I started wearing baggy clothes, walking curvy, hiding my growth. I wanted to disappear. My mother started to move away. Before, she would call me to help in the kitchen, talk about soap operas, teach me how to sew. Then she started acting like I was a guest. Cordial, but distant. One day, in between sewing, she said, "You'll see, when you have a daughter, you'll understand." That cut me, because I knew I would never want a daughter in this world. I didn't want to repeat that cycle, but I couldn't tell her that either. So I just kept quiet, as always. Robert started sleeping later and later. He said it was insomnia, that work made him nervous. I knew it was an excuse. He waited for the house to quieten down. He waited for my mother to turn off the light. He'd wait for me to be in my room, alone. And when I heard footsteps, the floor creaking, the doorknob creaking, my blood would run cold, but I didn't cry anymore. I'd learned to switch off. My body stayed there, but my head ran away. I thought of other things, seas, movies I'd never seen, the names of cities far away. It was my way of escaping without leaving the place. One night I dreamt that I was pushing him down the stairs. I woke up sweating, panting, but with a relief that lasted the whole day. It was just a dream, but it gave me strength. I began to imagine scenarios. What if he died? What if he disappeared? What if someone found out and took me away? But then I remembered my mother, her dependence, her fear of being alone, without money, without a roof over her head. And again, I gave up. I wasn't just his prisoner. I was a prisoner of her fragility, too. One Saturday, it was raining heavily. Robert went out to buy something and was late. My mother, agonized, called me into the kitchen. She had an old shoebox full of letters, photos, and documents. She started showing me everything, as if it were a nostalgia session. But in the middle, a photo of him fell out, alone, shirtless, smiling. She grabbed it quickly, put it in the bottom of the box, and said, "There are some things we'd better not keep." I pretended not to see, but in that sentence, I understood more than she wanted to show. She knew. She'd always known. When I was 15, I started working in a snack bar on the other side of town. It was only a half shift after school, washing dishes and clearing tables. For many people, it didn't seem like much, but for me, it was a piece of the world outside, a place where I could exist without being just a shadow. My mother told me that I should learn to manage, that a woman who earns her own money doesn't depend on anyone. I was surprised by what she said, but I understood that, deep down, it was her way of giving me a push without going head-to-head with him. Robert didn't like the idea very much. He complained that I would be late, that a girl's place was at home. But my mother insisted, and as he liked to maintain the image of a modern, tolerant husband for others, he ended up accepting. With that disguised look of disgust on his face and eyes that already told me there was going to be a price. The uniform was ugly, but I wore it like a suit of armor. At work, nobody touched me. Nobody looked at me like that. My colleagues were rowdy, talked nonsense, and dreamed big. They included me in conversations, even when I didn't say anything. The manager, Mrs. Mabel, was practical, demanding, but fair. One day, she gave me a chocolate cookie at the end of the day and told me I was doing well. That kindness tore me apart inside. It was so rare to hear something good without suspicion. I went home with the taste of the cookie in my mouth and a knot in my chest. The journey home was long. I took 2 buses and walked for a while. The time alone on the street, even though I was tired, was the closest to freedom I had ever felt. I was afraid, of course, especially when it got dark, but it was a different kind of fear. The one on the street was unpredictable, but fleeting. The one at home was constant, glued to my skin. I preferred the former. At least there you could run. One night I arrived a little late. I'd stayed to help close the till. When I came in, he was sitting in the living room, shirtless, with a glass of whiskey in his hand. The television was on at a low volume. My mother was asleep in the bedroom. The door closed. He looked at me without saying anything. He just stood up, walked over to me, and brushed a lock of my hair away from my face. I froze. "You're becoming quite the little woman," he muttered. I didn't reply. I walked past him like someone crossing a minefield. I locked my bedroom door and sat down on the floor. I was shaking so much that I could barely get my shoes off. He didn't come in. Not that night. But I knew it had been a warning. The days dragged on. Work became my escape. I started keeping money in a little box hidden inside my mattress. Every coin, every note was a piece of the future I wanted to build away from there. I had no exact plan, just the certainty that I couldn't grow old in that house. I wrote down loose ideas in a notebook, cities I wanted to visit, jobs I dreamed of having, names I would give to children I might never have. That was my refuge. With every word I wrote, I felt as if my story could be rewritten, not by him, for me. At school, my grades started to drop. The principal called my mother in for a chat. She came home with her eyes downcast. She said they were worried, that I looked too tired, distracted. I kept waiting for her to ask why, to look at me truthfully. But all she said was that I should try harder, that this chance to study was what would make me succeed. And once again, I felt that my pain was invisible even to her. Robert, on the other hand, began to get closer. He complimented my hair, asked about the cafeteria, and feigned an affection that disgusted me. One day, he offered me a ride to work. He said he wanted to see where I was spending my time. I refused. I invented that the manager didn't like parents turning up unannounced. He laughed, but didn't insist. It scared me. When he accepted too quickly, it was because he already had another way of controlling. One weekend, my mother traveled to visit a sick aunt. I said I had an exam on Monday and couldn't go. I was left alone with him. I planned to spend the day in the cafeteria, offer extra help, anything to avoid staying at home. But it rained too much. The city flooded, buses stopped. The manager sent everyone away early. I went home with my stomach turning. He was waiting for me. The front door unlocked, the living room light on. When I came in, he pretended to be surprised and asked if I wanted some tea. I said I was tired and went straight to the bedroom. I locked it. I sat on the edge of the bed with my heart racing. Slow footsteps in the corridor. He stopped at the door, knocked twice. I forgot to say goodnight. I didn't answer. The doorknob turned. It was locked. I heard him sigh. Then the sound of footsteps leaving. I sat there, motionless, until the sun began to rise. When the light flooded into the room, I cried, but it was a dry cry of anger, disgust, and helplessness. That morning, I decided to speed up my plan. I had to leave. I couldn't wait to turn 18. I started looking for ways. I asked around in the cafeteria about cheap rent, extra hours. A colleague mentioned a hostel near the bus station, small but safe. I did the math. If I put it all together, it would be enough for a month, maybe 2. It wasn't much, but it was life. I put away my notebooks, my few clothes, and an old photo of my grandmother. I prepared a small suitcase, hidden in the back of the closet. Every night, I checked to see if the money was still there. Every penny was compressed hope, but he also sensed that something was changing. He started to become more irritable, more attentive. He came home from work earlier. He was more observant. One day, he came into my room without knocking. He said he was worried about me, that I was distant, cold. I said it was tiredness, school, work. He looked at me with that crooked smile and said, "You're my girl. You don't have to run away from me." I smiled back, fake, just like him. And in that smile, I knew for sure the time was coming. The following week, I started to act differently. I needed to lose my way. It was like being on a chessboard where every wrong move could be costly. I laughed at some of my mother's jokes again, helped more in the kitchen, accepted the tea he offered without frowning. I tried hard to look like the same girl as before, obedient, grateful, shaped by fear. Inside, I counted the days like someone counting grains of rice in a time of famine. The money was enough to take a risk. The only thing missing was the courage, which was still stumbling over the guilt of leaving my mother. But something inside me couldn't stand another second, stuck in that rotten scenario. In the cafeteria, I asked for more shifts. Mabel said she could fit me in at the weekend, but wanted to know if everything was okay at home. I smiled and said yes, that I just needed the money to help with the bills. She accepted without question, but I could see in her eyes that she didn't quite believe me. Maybe it was the way I looked at the floor or the way I trembled slightly when someone touched my shoulder. She didn't insist. She just told me to be careful on the street at night. I obliged. But the danger, she didn't know, was sleeping with the door open in my house. Robert kept up his dirty game. One day sweeter, the next harder. He talked about the future, college, even marriage, as if he were a father, as if he had some right over my path. One Sunday, he asked me to sit with him in the living room. My mother was in the yard doing the laundry, the radio on loud. He poured me a glass of juice and started talking about how difficult life was, how he was the only one who really cared about me. He said I needed to stop acting like a scared animal, that he treated me with affection. And there, listening to those words, I felt something welling up inside as if my soul was trying to escape through my skin. I didn't drink. I didn't speak. I just got up and went to my room. I slammed the door harder than I should have. He didn't say anything, but his eyes kept burning into my back. Later that afternoon, I decided to run away for good. I had read in a leaflet in the cafeteria about a free technical course in the neighboring town. It It wasn't much, but it was a root. I went to the school library, got the number, wrote it down on a piece of paper hidden inside my bra. I planned to call from a public phone the next day. I just needed to survive that night. Just one more. I arrived home with tense shoulders. Every noise made me jump. My mother was in the kitchen preparing mincemeat. She smiled and asked how the day had been. I said I was tired and was going to my room. She nodded without looking me in the eye. Before going upstairs, I stopped and watched her for a moment. She was stirring the pot with slow, tired movements. I wanted to hug her, shout at her, ask her if she'd ever had the courage to go out too, but I swallowed the impulse. It was too late for that. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house seemed to get louder. The wind hitting the window, the creak of the furniture, the crack of the wood on the floor. I got up, put on 2 pants, 3 t-shirts, and a wool sweater on top. I grabbed my backpack with the money, my notebook, and the only photo of my grandmother. I opened the bedroom window and looked out onto the dark street. I lacked the courage to jump. My heart was pounding in my neck. I sat on the bed, trembling. Then I heard it. His door opening, footsteps in the corridor, my door handle turning slowly. I'd forgotten to lock it. He walked in. Me, paralyzed. Him with that smell of drink, small eyes. He sat down next to me. He said quietly, almost whispering, that he had been worried, that he had noticed me moving away, that he missed me. His hand touched my leg. The world froze. I couldn't react. I just took a deep breath and closed my eyes. He stood there for a few seconds, then got up and left. The door remained open. I didn't sleep anymore. When the sun started to turn the sky gray, I decided I couldn't put it off. The next morning, I asked to leave school early, saying I felt sick. The principal gave me permission. I ran to the bus station. I bought a ticket to the city of the technical course. The bus was an hour away. I called the hostel in the brochure and asked if they had a room. The girl said yes, I could pay by the week. I breathed a sigh of relief. For the first time in years, relief wasn't mixed with fear. I came home just to leave a note. I didn't write much. I just said I had to go, not to blame anyone, that it was for me. I left it on the bed. I picked up my backpack and walked slowly down the stairs. Robert wasn't there. My mother was probably at the market. The house seemed suspended, as if it knew something was going to change. I crossed the street without looking back. I sat on the bus station bench with my backpack on my lap and my soul in pieces. The bus arrived. I got on without thinking. I chose the last seat. When it started moving, I cried. Softly. Not out of sadness, but because, for the first time, I was the one deciding where to go. The new city was smaller, quieter, with almost no traffic on the streets during the week. When I got off the bus, my legs were shaking so much that I had to sit on the first bench in the bus station before walking to the hostel. The smell of stale cigarettes and frying brought me back to reality. It was ugly, dark, but it had a roof. The girl at reception, Amanda, looked tired, but not mean. She took my name and asked for an advance. I handed over the money with sweaty hands. She gave me the key to room number 7 on the 2nd floor at the end of the corridor. That cramped space became my refuge. A hard bed, a sink with a dripping tap, a window that overlooked the cracked wall of the neighboring building. Even so, it was paradise. No one entered without knocking. Nobody watched me. For the first time, I could sleep without hearing footsteps in the hallway. But peace doesn't come without guilt. For the first few days, everything felt wrong. I felt like someone was going to find me, pull me by the arm, drag me back. At night, I would dream of him breaking down the door, my mother crying, the neighbors whispering. I'd wake up wet with sweat, clutching my backpack like it was a life jacket. At the technical course, I pretended to be 18, a lie I swallowed, without remorse. They didn't want papers, just presence and silence. The nursing teacher, Mrs. Rita, was strict. She looked you in the eye as if she wanted to dig inside you. Sometimes she caught me off guard, asking where I was from and why I had chosen that course. I answered in short sentences. I didn't want attention, just a diploma. Learning there became an obsession. If one day I had to fend for myself, I would have a profession. and maybe, who knows, help someone other than myself. At the corner market, I got a job packing groceries. They didn't pay much, but they gave me the expired products that still fit. I ate hard noodles and stale bread, but I didn't complain. I learned to make soup from what I could find. Before long, the owner of the boarding house started calling me a quiet girl. Sometimes she left an apple on the doorstep. Little gestures that I treasured. I didn't trust anyone, but I didn't refuse kindness either. I just observed, cataloged, and kept a safe distance. I avoided mirrors. I didn't like seeing my thin face, my deep-set eyes. It reminded me too much of what I left behind. Even so, some mornings I tried to do my hair differently, to wear lipstick borrowed from a colleague. I wanted to see if one day I could recognize myself as someone new, but all it took was one wrong word, one unexpected touch on the arm, and it would all come back. The body still thought it was there. It still reacted as if it were in danger. On the other side of town, there was a public telephone. I went there once a week, calling the old boarding house under a false name, just to see if anyone had asked for me. They never did. It gave me relief and sadness at the same time. It was as if I had died and no one had noticed. One day, Amanda said that a man had passed by asking if there were any new girls living there. She didn't give any details, but my stomach turned. From then on, I started sleeping with my chair against the door. In the classroom, I met Carla. She was my age, or at least she claimed to be. She was cheeky, laughed loudly, and pulled me into conversation, even against my will. One day she gave me a pair of costume jewelry earrings and said that they suited me. I wanted to refuse, but she insisted. I thanked her with an awkward smile. I held them in my hand all afternoon, as if they were diamonds. She started calling me a charming weirdo. I responded with short silences and a smile or two. She was the first person in a long time who didn't scare me. Even so, I avoided getting attached. I already knew what it was like to lose people, what it's like to trust and then have everything turned against you. But Carla was insistent. One Saturday night, she asked me to a party at some colleague's house. I refused. I said I was tired. She laughed and left a slice of carrot cake in my backpack. To sweeten your bitter life. I ate it alone in my room, crying quietly. Not for the sadness, for the kindness. One day, as I was leaving the course, I saw a car parked across the street. I didn't recognize it immediately, but my heart raced. There was something about the dark glass, the way the engine was running, that put me on alert. I waited 10 minutes. It didn't move. I ran to the market, entered through the back door, and asked the manager to let me stay for a while. He was surprised, but allowed me. I sat between cardboard boxes, my hands sweaty, my head spinning. When I returned to the street, the car was gone, but the fear remained. At the hostel, I started writing letters to myself. Outbursts that I didn't send, that I hid inside my pillow. I told them how I felt, what I remembered, what I wanted to forget. A crooked way of not exploding. In one of them, I wrote, "You left, but the past still sleeps beside you." I burned that letter the next day because it was too true to continue existing. Time passed slowly. I ate the money I had saved little by little, taking turns between courses and work. There was almost nothing left. Even so, I carried on. Every morning it was an effort to get up, put on the same shabby clothes, smile at the cashier, pretend everything was fine. But resisting was a victory. Every day without seeing his face was an achievement. Every night I slept without startling him was a miracle, until an envelope appeared on my bedroom doorstep. No sender, thick paper, name written in pen. I trembled before opening it. Inside, a letter. The handwriting was all too familiar. I recognized it from afar. It was from my mother. I held the envelope for minutes, my fingers sweating like dynamite about to explode. The name written on the top was mine, but the handwriting seemed to scream. Recognizing my mother's handwriting was like being slapped barehanded. It knocked me over. I didn't open it right away. I kept it under my pillow as if I needed to buy time before facing it. At night, I lay down and stared at the ceiling, trying to guess what it contained. I thought about tearing it up without reading it, But the truth was that part of me still wanted to hear her voice, even if it was on paper. The next day, before leaving for my course, I opened it slowly. 2 sheets written carefully. It began with, "My darling daughter," as if we were in a fairy tale. She said she was worried, that she missed me, that the house seemed dead without my presence. She didn't directly mention why I had run away, as if not knowing or feigning ignorance was easier to bear. In between the lines, he tried to justify himself. She said that life was hard, that sometimes you have to accept things in order to survive, that silence isn't always cowardice, but a kind of shield. Tidy words to try and explain the inexplicable. I read to the end. Her hand trembled in the handwriting of the last few sentences. She asked me to come back, if only to talk. She said that Robert had changed, that he was sad, that he felt my absence like a hole in the house. At those times, disgust would rise in my chest and burn everything. She still referred to him as part of her life, as if the pain he caused was a tide that had passed. And it wasn't. That water still drowned me every night. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. As much as it hurt, I knew it would come one day, that she would try to pull me back, even though she hadn't bothered to protect me when she could. The difference was that now I was no longer a hostage. Fear still lived with me, but it no longer ruled everything. I had my routine, my schedule, my choices, and above all, my distance. During the course, I became airborne. Carla noticed. She poked my arm in the middle of class and asked if I was in pain. I shook my head and said it was just tiredness. She didn't insist, but during the break, she sat down next to me, shared a cereal bar, and stood there in silence. It was the kind of gesture that said more than 1,000 questions. I put half of it in my jacket pocket. In the world I lived in, half was already a lot. The letter was eating me up. I started to write a reply but tore it up before I'd finished. I tried to write again with less anger, then with more. No version seemed right. I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to open a wound for someone who never had the courage to clean mine. Night fell, and her envelope still weighed in my drawer like lead. Days passed. Another envelope appeared, this time smaller, with a single sheet of paper. A simple message: "I love you, forgive me. If you want to talk, I'll be waiting. I'll be on the balcony every night." It sent a shiver down my spine. She knew where I was, or he did, maybe both of them. The certainty that they had found me took my breath away. That city, which had once seemed like a hiding place, had once again become a trap. I told Amanda, the owner of the hostel, that I might need to change my room. She didn't ask why, just nodded and gave me the key to number 3 downstairs. It was even smaller, without a window, but with a reinforced lock. I thanked her as if she had saved my life. I locked the door 3 times that night. I slept with my backpack ready beside the bed, just like in the old days. My heart didn't know whether to be scared or alert. The next morning, Carla was waiting for me at the gate. She noticed my deep-set eyes and cold hands. She pulled me into a corner and said, "If anyone is looking for you, talk to me. I have an aunt who can help. She works with people who solve problems." The phrase startled me. I asked her what kind of problem. All she said was, "The kind that haunts your shadow." I said no more, but that offer kept replaying in my head. I went to the bus station and tried to find out who had delivered the letter. The receptionist said it was an older man with a closed face and a southern accent. I asked if he left a name. She denied it, but said he seemed nervous and asked for me as if he knew where I was. I thanked her and left trembling. Hell had a new address. The next letter didn't come in an envelope. It was just a sheet of paper, handwritten, left at the gate. Robert. He wrote it himself. He said he forgave me for running away, that he understood my suffering, that he himself was also a victim of a difficult childhood. I had a craving. I tore up in the middle of the street. That wasn't an excuse. It was poison. He wanted to bend me over, make me feel that we were the same, but we weren't. He chose. I survived. I went back to the boarding house shaking. I sat on the bed and cried like I hadn't done for weeks. Amanda heard and knocked on the door. She asked if I needed anything. I said no. but when she brought me a cup of tea, I realized that I needed it more than any explanation. In the evening, I leaned against the cold wall of my new room and began to write. But it wasn't an answer. It was a plan. I mapped out possibilities, changing cities, seeking help, tell someone outside. I remembered Carla's aunt. I decided to ask. Maybe it was time to stop running away and start taking action. The next day, before class even started, I looked for Carla by the side stairs. She was smoking, as she always did before first period, with her eyes squinted at the morning sun. I arrived awkwardly and asked her if her aunt's offer was still on. She smiled like she already knew. She threw the cigarette butt on the floor and said yes, that all it would take was one word and she'd sort everything out. I didn't want any details. I just asked for her phone number. I wrote it down on a piece of paper and hid it in my bra. It was safer than trusting a purse or pocket. I spent the whole day with a throbbing head. The class seemed distant, as if I were watching my life from outside. I tried to pay attention, but what kept hammering away was that man's letter, that disgusting attempt to put himself on the same level as me, as if what he'd done was just human error, as if everything that happened to me was the result of his past and not the choices he made every night while my mother slept. In the evening, after a meager dinner, I went down to the street with the excuse of buying soap powder. I walked to an old telephone box, a bit crooked, full of posters. I plugged in the number and dialed Carla's aunt's number. A woman with a firm voice answered, without much patience. I introduced myself as directly as I could, said I was a friend of her niece's and that I needed to talk. She asked for a name. I gave a false one. I said it was urgent. She made an appointment for 2 days later at a small beauty salon where she cut hair for $20 and did other services, if the person knew how to ask. I went back to my room with my heart beating faster than it should. For the first time, I was considering something outside my pain zone. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was acting. And that's scarier than any shadow. I didn't sleep much. I dreamt of my mother with empty eyes, of Robert smiling in the corner, of my body trapped in a labyrinth with no way out. I woke up sweating, with a dry throat, but with the certainty that I could no longer just run away. On the course, Carla noticed my silence. She asked me if I had called. I nodded, without saying anything else. She put a small package in my bag and told me to open it only if I really needed it. I didn't question it. I left it there. The weight of it stayed with me for the rest of the day as a reminder that the world I knew wasn't just about fear. It was also about choice. 2 days later, I arrived at the salon. It was small, squeezed between a laundrette and a second-hand clothes store. The facade had peeling paint, but inside it was clean. The woman who saw me wore glasses hanging around her neck, her hair tied up in a messy bun. She told me to sit down. She started combing a customer's hair while asking me indirect questions, as if she was analyzing my courage with each strand that fell to the floor. I told him, without much detail. I said I'd run away, that he'd found me, that I needed to disappear again, but this time for good. She didn't blink. She asked if I had any money. I told her how much I had. She mentally calculated it and said it would be enough to get me started. She warned me that it wasn't magic, that disappearing required cutting, pain, and absolute silence. I accepted without hesitation. I wasn't looking for comfort. I wanted an end. She arranged to meet me on a Wednesday at a point on the road where few buses passed. She would bring false documents, clothes, maybe even a new name. She asked me not to tell anyone, that if I hesitated, the risk would be mine. I agreed. I said goodbye with a handshake. Firm it hurt, but firm. I went back to the hostel with a heavy head. Amanda looked at me strangely and asked if everything was all right. I said yes, but I could tell she was suspicious. There was something in the way I walked that I couldn't hide any longer. My haste had become part of my body. That night, I reread my mother's last letter. In every line, I saw denial. The way she still clung to the idea that it was nothing serious, that maternal love was enough to heal the damage. I tore it up and threw it away, for the first time, without pain. It was just paper now, empty words that could no longer hold me. During the course, Carla asked me out for the weekend. I made up that I had an appointment. She looked deep into my eyes and said that if I disappeared, at least let her know I was alive. I replied with a sad smile, the kind that already means goodbye. I spent the next few days gathering the last of my things. I packed what I could into 2 bags. I left behind the notebook, the old clothes from the market, even the earrings Carla had given me. It hurt to let go, but I had to. Carrying too many memories also weighs you down. The day before the trip, I dreamt about the street from my childhood. It was dark, silent, and I was running without being able to move. When I woke up, I realized that what was holding me back wasn't fear of him, but the bond that my mother was still trying to keep alive, and that had to be cut too. I arrived at the appointed point early. The road was empty, dust rising in the wind, the sound of an old car approaching. It was her. She stopped, opened the door, and told me to get in. I got in. I didn't look back. The road never seemed to end. The cracked asphalt, the crooked posts, the smell of dust invading the woman's old car. She drove quietly with only the radio on at a low volume, an instrumental music station that gave the moment a strange air. I stared out of the window without seeing anything. Each tree I passed looked the same as the last, perhaps because, at that moment, everything outside me was just noise. Inside, that's where the noise was screaming. She handed me a bag from the back seat. Inside were documents with a different name, a new blouse, a cell phone with a clean SIM card, and an envelope with handwritten instructions. She said I was someone else now. I had an address in a neighboring town, a place in a laundromat, a rented room in a simple but safe neighborhood. I looked at everything like someone watching a movie. It didn't feel like my life. It was as if I was living the story of someone who had already died and been reborn in another skin. We stopped at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. She told me to get off and catch a bus that would come in 20 minutes. She said that was the end of the line for her. I nodded without asking. I grabbed my backpack and the instructions and got off without looking back. She left quickly, as if in a hurry to disappear from my sight. I sat on the wooden bench, my heart racing and my hands shaking. The bus arrived as the sun was almost out. I got on without thinking. I sat in the penultimate row. The driver didn't ask anything. Cash payment, no receipt. Better that way. The journey took more than an hour, enough time for me to reread every word on the paper inside the envelope. The new name sounded strange, like borrowed clothes, but at the same time, it gave me a freedom I never knew how to describe. Now I could exist without being recognized, without carrying his scarred face, without carrying her surname. Arriving in the city, I followed the hand-drawn map. The neighborhood was simple, full of terraced houses, low gates, children running on the sidewalk. I walked with firm steps, pretending to be safe. But inside, it was all makeshift. I rang the doorbell of number 22. A lady opened the door, looked at my backpack, then at my face. She called me by my false name. I answered with an almost voiceless yes. She smiled and pointed inside. The room was at the back, separate entrance, single bed, old closet, a cracked mirror on the wall. Better than any palace, because there I was, nobody. And being nobody was exactly what I needed to start becoming someone. Over the next few days, I started work in the laundry. Hard work, but honest. I washed sheets, sorted clothes, and ironed until my fingers hurt. The boss was dry, but not cruel. He paid me in cash, didn't ask questions. My coworkers spoke little to me, only what was necessary, and that suited me fine. The less involvement, the less risk. Only one of them, Marlene, would strike up a conversation every now and then. She asked if I had a family in the city, if I was living alone, if I needed anything. I always answered carefully. I said that everything was fine, that I preferred to keep to myself. She respected that. At night, I would lock myself in my room and write down on pieces of paper anything that came into my head. Old memories, confused feelings, names I wished I had. I didn't sign it. Then I'd burn it all in the sink with a match. It was my ritual. As if, by turning to ash, each memory of the past lost its hold on me. Not all of them burned easily. Some took a while, some sparked before going out. Those hurt more, but they still turned to dust. Over time, I began to walk the streets of the neighborhood without looking over my shoulder, still carefully, of course, but with less fear. People didn't recognize me. I no longer had to explain my silence or justify my fast gait. I could breathe, but freedom comes at a price, and mine was loneliness. A month after my escape, I received a phone call, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something in me wanted to know. When I answered, no one spoke, just breathing for long seconds. Then his voice. That voice I would never forget, even if I lived 1,000 years under another name. He said, "I know where you are." And he hung up. The floor disappeared. My hands froze. My body froze. I sat on the floor, leaning against the door, trying to control the air that wouldn't come in. He had found me, even with a new name, a different city, secret instructions. It didn't matter. He had traces. Maybe my mother, maybe someone from the boarding house, maybe his own predatory instinct. All I know is that he knew, and I, once again, became the hunted. The next morning, I asked for time off work. I said I was sick. I went to an internet cafe down the street. I sent Carla an encrypted message. I said I needed to know if he had contacted her. The reply came quickly. "Yes, he came by yesterday. He wanted to know if you were okay." I didn't say anything, but he's looking. It was like being punched again. The feeling of security evaporated. I went back to my room and tidied up my things, which were few. I hid money in the waistband of my pants, between my socks, even in the hem of my blouse. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. For the second time in my life, I prepared to disappear. Only this time, with more coldness, fewer tears, more certainty. I slept badly. I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the sidewalk. My heart almost burst out of my mouth. I waited. No knock on the door, no sign of a break-in, but I knew it was only a matter of time. Now he was close, and what had once been fear turned to anger. I spent the day walking in circles inside my room, my feet tingling from stepping on the same floor. Every sound coming from the street sounded like an announcement of tragedy. The slam of the front door, the bark of a louder dog, the scream of a child playing on the other side of the sidewalk. Everything made me jump, as if at any second it was going to appear, force me out of there, throw me back into a hole where I didn't exist as a person. But this time, it wasn't just fear that accompanied me. Something else was stirring inside me. It wasn't courage yet, it was thirsty anger. And when it grows, it becomes an impulse. I called Carla from the pharmacy on the corner. She answered on the second ring. She said she missed me, that she was worried. I asked if he had come back. She said no, but that a neighbor had told her about a strange man hanging around the boarding house. I thanked her and asked her not to tell anyone where I was, not even Mom. She promised, and I hung up with my chest pounding. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. I couldn't run away anymore. I'd done that for years. I'd sneaked through the cracks in life, always trying to go unnoticed, like someone apologizing for breathing. But I wasn't that little girl cowering under the bed anymore, nor was I the girl with deep-set eyes who accepted alms out of kindness. I was past the stage of just surviving. Now I wanted something I'd never had: control. I decided to wait, but not with my arms crossed. I started carrying a pocket knife in my pocket, small but sharp. A present from Marlene, who was more suspicious than she let on. She didn't ask, but the day she saw me too scared to disguise it, all she said was, "If anyone comes, you're not a cornered animal anymore. Do you hear me?" I took that pocket knife as if it were a shield, and inside, I wished I didn't have to use it. But if I did, I wouldn't shake. The days passed with dragging steps. The city seemed smaller, more cramped, as if the alleys were watching me. Every time I heard a car stop nearby, my body stiffened. I looked through the curtain with my hand in my pocket, hoping to see that face emerge from the driver's seat, but it never appeared. And that, instead of calming me down, made everything worse. Because the invisible threat is more consuming than the direct blow. It was on a Thursday that the owner of the house called me into the kitchen. She said that a man had called, asking for a woman with a name similar to the one I was using now. She said she denied it, but thought it was strange. She asked me to keep an eye out. I thanked him with my heart in my throat. I went back to my room and started to put together a new plan. Only this time it wasn't an escape plan. It was a trap. I took out an old notebook and began to write down the times of the house, the movement of the street, the cars that passed by frequently. I started going out more at night, walking aimlessly, observing faces. One day, as I was leaving the bakery, I saw a man standing near the newsstand, wearing a dark cap and sunglasses, at night. He didn't look directly at me, but the way he turned when I walked past set me off. I pretended not to notice, but I wrote down the model of the car. It was him. I felt it. The body recognizes the hunter, even in disguise. That night, I slept with the knife under my pillow. The phone number of Carla's aunt's salon was still in my pocket. I thought about calling, but something inside me told me that if I started relying on too much help, I'd never get out of the trapped position, and I wasn't going to be a prey anymore. On Saturday, I left my bedroom door unlocked. I turned off the light early. I lay on the bed dressed, with my shoes on my feet and my pocket knife in my hand. I waited. The clock on the wall ticked like a hammer in my head. At 3 a.m, I heard light footsteps. It wasn't a neighbor. It wasn't a cat on the roof. It was people who knew my silence. The doorknob turned slowly. I held my breath. The door opened slowly, like in a bad horror movie. The silhouette in the dark left no doubt. He entered with the caution of someone who believes he will find easy prey. But there was no girl there. There was a woman armed with her own desperation. When he approached the bed, I jumped up. The knife was already open. He froze. I saw his eyes go wide. I said my name, the old one, the one I'd already buried. But hearing it from him gave me strength. I shouted back, "I've already called the police." It was a lie, but it was enough. He ran. He bumped into the chair, tripped over the carpet, and ran out of the open door. I ran to the street, saw the car start and disappear around the bend. I went back to my room, sweating, panting, but alive. And with one certainty, next time he won't run. He'll fall. The next day, the sun seemed to mock me. The sky was clear, the heat was beating down on the asphalt. Everything was so calm on the outside, while inside I was still shivering. I spent hours sitting on my bedroom floor, with my back to the door, trying to understand what had just happened. The image of him standing there in the dark, the way he pronounced my name as if he still had the right to it, the cowardice on his face when he realized he no longer owned anything there. It all replayed in my head like a movie we didn't ask to see. Only this time, the protagonist was no longer on her knees. She was standing, armed and alert. I texted Carla to let her know that he had shown up. She replied straight away, saying she wasn't going to leave me alone. She asked for his address. I hesitated. It was still hard to trust, but I replied. She said she'd come in the evening with her aunt. I thanked her without saying another word. I put the penknife back under my pillow, but now with more pride than fear. I had defended my space, and even if he came back, I wouldn't find the same girl. The owner of the house noticed my strange look. She asked if anything had happened. I thought about lying, but my eyes must have given everything away. I blurted it out. She turned pale, then furious. She said that if she saw him again, she would call the neighbors, the pastor, even the police if necessary. I felt like crying right then and there, not because of the threat, but because it was the first time someone had really defended me without making me pay for it. When Carla arrived, she hugged me like someone holding a broken vase. Her aunt came with her, with small eyes and the posture of someone who knows what she's doing. She sat down in the kitchen, ordered coffee, took a pad of paper and a pen out of her handbag. I wanted details. I described the car, the clothes, the voice. She wrote it down without reacting, like she'd heard it before. When I'd finished, she got up slowly and said she'd sort it out. She didn't ask if I wanted it. She just told me. And that gave me a peace I hadn't known before. Carla stayed until nightfall. She slept on the floor of the bedroom, saying that nobody was going to touch me with her there. We talked very little. We just stayed there, sharing the silence as if it were a blanket. When morning came, she left with a kiss on the forehead and a promise to come back. That morning, I went to work with my body tired, but my mind awake. Marlene noticed. She said I was different. I said yes, that something had changed inside me, and it really had. Because now I no longer walked in fear. I walked with purpose. I knew he was around, but I also knew that I wasn't the same anymore. And that, in the end, was what made the difference. Days passed. Each night, I heard more noises from the street, but with less panic. It was as if I was waiting for him, not to run away, but to face him. But he was gone. No sign of him. No new attempts. No call. That, more than his presence, unsettled me. Because disappearance, in the hands of people like that, is never peace. It's a strategic retreat. It was on a Sunday that Carla showed up again. She was carrying a bag, a pot of fresh beans, and a hard expression. She said that her aunt had spoken to people from outside, people who sort things out so that nobody asks too many questions afterwards. I asked her what that meant. She didn't answer. She just said that from then on I might never hear from him again, and that if that happened, I should move on, live, forget. I don't know if I believed her, but that day, eating hot beans, sitting on the porch step, I felt a lightness that seemed impossible. I stood there looking at the sky, listening to the neighbors talking, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't think about running. I thought about staying. On Monday, I went to work as usual. But the look on people's faces seemed different, as if they sensed that something had changed, and it had. I was more upright, firmer, more alive. When a cheeky customer made an idiotic comment, I responded coolly. When Marlene asked me to help her with a pile of clothes, I went without hesitation. It was all there, not because of the clean clothes or the routine, but because fear, the fear that had been dragging me down for years, was now behind me, not in front. In the evening, I called Carla's aunt's number. I thanked her. I said I didn't want to know what she'd done. I just wanted to move on. She understood. She hung up without saying goodbye, and it was the most sincere goodbye I've ever had. After that, I started saving money again, not to run away, but to build. I made plans. I thought about finishing my degree, getting a diploma, moving to another city out of desire, not dread. I thought maybe one day I'd tell someone my story, maybe write it down, not to cause pity, but to prevent others from experiencing what I experienced. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing. My body still bears scars where no one can see. But what lifts me up is no longer fear. It's the memory that I survived, and that now, finally, I own my name. I woke up to the sound of the fan turning slowly, and a ray of light coming through the wall from the crack in the door. For a second, I thought I was still in that old rotten wooden house, smelling of old sweat and burnt oil. My head did that nasty trick of confusing the past with the present, but then clarity reminded me. Now I was somewhere else. The floor was firm. The windows were locked. The bed was mine. And the body that used to shrink to fit in the corner now took up the whole space. I got up slowly, put my feet on the cold floor, and took a deep breath. I still had that weight on my chest, but it wasn't the same anymore. It was a memory, not a threat. I went into the kitchen and calmly made myself some coffee. The old radio was playing an old song, the kind my mother liked. I thought of her. I wondered if she was still in the same house, sitting in her usual chair, pretending that her absence was just nostalgia and not guilt. She never wrote to me again, not a word since that last letter. And you know what? It's better that way. There's silence that heals more than any embellished excuse. I learned that the hard way. At the laundry, I continued working for a few more months. I saved enough money to pay 3 months' rent in advance at a new address. Not too far, but far enough that no one would find me by chance. When I said goodbye to Marlene, She hugged me tightly and said that if I ever needed anything, just come back. I promised I'd write. That was a lie, not out of spite, but because it was time to cut the last threads that connected me to that version of myself that only knew how to survive. I moved to a different neighborhood where no one knew my name or my story. There, I really started again. I got a job in a grocery store, packing, cleaning shelves, and taking stock. The owner, Mr. Martin, was strict but fair. He never raised his voice, never looked down. That was luxury for me. The colleagues talked a lot, laughed loudly, and I gradually got into the rhythm. I still kept my distance, but now by choice, not out of fear. Every evening, I sat on the balcony with a new notebook. I began to write everything down. No longer in loose pieces, but from the beginning. From the first time he entered the room to the moment I ran down the road, backpack on my back, certain that he would never return. I wrote without haste, without frills, like someone who removes a splinter from the skin, millimeter by millimeter. Sometimes I cried, sometimes I laughed. There were days when I stopped in the middle, pen in hand, feeling angry at the paper for having to carry so much. But I kept going, because for the first time, my story was mine, and no one was going to keep it quiet. After a while, I got a call from Carla. She was living in another state, had found a job in a small office, and was thinking of going to university. We talked for almost an hour. We laughed, we cried, we reminisced about the nights when we held on just because we promised each other that it would end. She said she was proud of me. I replied that I only got this far because she held my hand. The truth is that without her, I might have stayed there, dying on my feet. At the end of the call, she said, "If you ever want to tell your story, go ahead, but don't force yourself. You've already won." After that, I bought a new cell phone. I put my real name on it. For the first time, without fear. It was like tattooing the world with proof that I exist, that I survived, that no one had erased my trail. One Saturday, I decided to go downtown. I went into a clothes store and chose a red dress. I never had the courage to wear red. I always thought it drew too much attention, that it revealed too much body. But that day, I bought it without thinking. I put it on in the store. I looked in the mirror and didn't cry. I smiled. Not because of the dress, but because of the reflection. It was me there, whole. On the way out, a man bumped into me, tall, a bit balding, with a bag in his hand. He apologized and went on his way. My heart beat faster, an old reflex, but it soon passed. It wasn't him. He was no longer anyone. Maybe he was still breathing out there. Maybe he was gone for good. It didn't matter. I no longer lived with his ghost in my wake. I walked home with my dress sticking to my legs because of the wind. I went inside, locked the door, hung the key on the hook, and lay down on the sofa. I looked up at the ceiling and thought, I've come this far. And if I did, it was because I didn't die in the first one, or the second, nor the one that came from the woman who should have protected me. I died inside 1,000 times. But every time I thought it was the end, I discovered that I could still go one step further. And so I went, with my soul mended, my body scarred, but with a strength that no one will ever take away. Today, at the age of 78, sitting in this dilapidated armchair, watching life go by through the window, I tell this story not out of vanity or to cause pity. I tell it because I know there are girls listening, living the same hell, thinking there's no way out. There is. It's hard. It's lonely, but there is. And if I managed it, with everything against me, with the world telling me to shut up, you can too. And if you've made it this far, well, leave a like for this old woman who decided to speak out, who decided to live, who chose not to die silent,